Hello and welcome back to another Uncle Tats Creative Shack video. Here we have the actual Uncle Tats Creative Shack in model form. In the previous videos you can see that for the most part this wooden kit is pretty much all done. I mean, as far as basic, we did the windows where we have some that are open. We have doors there. This window's open just a little bit there. This window in the front, and you can see the glass. Try to get the glass off the light here. If I can, you can see what I'm talking about. That one there. Chimney is bright red. We do have to tone that down with a whitewash to show the mortar in between the bricks. But for all intents and purposes, the house itself is done. So the next part of the series is creating a base for the house. We want to create some scenery and make a setting for filming for my channel. So what I've done is basically I have a piece of this. I believe this is a 1/2 inch thick. Is it 1/2 inch or I think it's 1/2 inch? Let's take a look here. That 3/4 of an inch thick. This is household insulation foam. You can buy it at Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever. And this is the thicker foam for insulating. And then right here, and I'm just going to leave this right here for now, this is a couple of pieces of balsa wood, and that's used to mark the location of where I want to put the house. And the reason for that, you want it to be raised up a little bit, and the reason for that is as I put scenery on here and put in some plaster and dirt and rocks and gravel and whatnot, I want the house to always have a nice raised flat platform that it will always be able to sit onto. And then in the final construction, you won't see the raised elements anymore. This will be covered in either grass or rocks or whatever, so you won't see the edge of the wood. You'll just see the top of it, and that will always be a flat spot to put my house. Then let me go back out for you. Then what I've done is I took 2 of these pieces of the foam, the same size, and what I did was I cut out an area where I wanted it to be just flat, where the house will be, and there wouldn't be any hills or anything. And then the rest of it I went and carved. So this piece here was just as thick as the bottom piece, but I went and carved it to get some landforms there, some basic landform structures where you'll go ahead and put trees and other hill-like elements there. So, and speaking of which, let's take the camera down. We have some various trees that I've used for other projects that I salvaged. The other projects for a model railroad project that it either didn't go anywhere, or I was just gathering elements for that. So I figured I would go ahead and use them again on this project. So some of the stuff what we got here, so I'll try to get this in camera view, is this is actually grass. It's not real grass. It's a mat that's made to look like grass. It's got like a sort of a plastic sort of gummy backing to it. And then you can just go ahead and glue this right to your your diorama there, and it will look like you've got grass. So I've got plenty of that in the storage over here. I'm going to be using some brown craft paint. This is just apple barrel nutmeg brown to eventually cover the pink with some plaster cloth, and then paint it all brown as a bottom base coat. Okay, and then over here, here's just some more tree elements, some more grass. We got some lichen material and different elements to make some scenery. Okay, so I think I'm actually going to use this Woodland Scenic glue to attach the top part to the bottom part of the foam. And I think if I use it sparingly enough, it should work. Let's see. It's a scenic glue is a really thick substance, but dries flexible. Yeah, it's not gonna want to come out here for me. Let's try this. There we go. We could just take it straight out of the bottle with the. Yeah, we might have to try that straight out of the bottle. It gets so thick that it gets the squeeze cap, blocks it right off. So let's see. So we're just going to use the toothpick to spread it out evenly. Yes, this is like a really thick paste. It says it's water adhesive, flexible, thick paste, yada yada yada. Doesn't say anything about drying fast. Dries clear with a matte finish. You could probably use, you could probably use whatever you have, I think, to glue the top to the bottom. It's just that the foam, this pink foam, is not very porous. So whatever you put on there, it's not going to get a lot of air to let it to dry. So you got to be careful with what you put on there. It may never end up drying. I've used clear caulking material in the past for like your bathrooms and tiles and stuff like that. That actually tends to work pretty good as well, but I don't have any of that right now, and I'm kind of doing this project based on whatever I already have here in the house. It's kind of good that way. Reuse, recycle, use whatever you already have. And of course, we're going to cover all this with plaster anyway, so the plaster will give the final lockdown adhesive to everything. Okay. That off to the side. So what you're seeing here, this is dried caulking material from when I used this in the past. And that project just never really went any further than just a test bed for different scenery making materials. And I was able to reclaim this foam from that test. It's always good to try something new on something that you don't really care too much about. So I'm just kind of like pressing it into place and kind of making sure things line up. I've got it where the edges will line up, and I may actually end up putting a detail element here, maybe with some wood or something to dress up the sides, but for right now I want to make sure that the foam is locked into place. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'll mark this location here. Just going to kind of put little tick marks there and there. I've got the wood just pressed into place right now. Go ahead and remove it, and then just put some of this more of this scenic cement, scenic glue. This can be found at hobby shops, or you can order it online at woodlandscenics.com. I don't think it's that expensive. I don't know what the price tag is on this, but I don't think it's that expensive. But a big bottle of it. It's really good. It's different than Elmer's. I know it kind of looks like Elmer's, but it's got some different properties to it. That you know, it's definitely thicker than Elmer's, and so it's got some gripping properties that are definitely better than what Elmer's is going to have for you. And yeah, it's definitely a good idea to put this on now at this step of the process, because now, as I cover this up with plaster, it this will already be firmly attached, so we won't have to worry about cleaning the surface to attach it later. And again, that's just press fit that down. The other options you could use, which I thought about using too, would be the Gorilla wood glue. But I don't know. I just decided not to use it this time. I think this stuff, the scenic cement, is actually better for this application than the wood glue is. Just because it's designed, this type of glue is designed more for this project, whereas the Gorilla wood glue is, you know, obviously designed for wood type projects. So you do have to be kind of careful as to what adhesives you use for what. Okay. And then we'll just let that dry. So the glue is now dried on my on this part of the model, where I've glued the top part of the foam here to the bottom using that scenic cement. I also glued the base here for the house, and I've currently just covered that with some masking tape because the base is balsa wood, and so the next steps that we're going to be doing involve water, and it's just easier to cover that balsa wood with the tape so it doesn't get warped. I ended up finding some plaster cloth. I have a large roll of this somewhere. I don't know where it went. I just recently cleaned my apartment, so I packed it away somewhere. But I did find this roll of it here. So we're going to be using this. It's from Woodland Scenics. You can pick it up at I think you can pick it up at Michael's or most craft shops anyways. And what we're going to do, and like I said, I don't have too much of it in here, but we're going to take a look and see how much I do have, and we're going to go ahead and show you some techniques for trying to cover this terrain with the plaster cloth. So what I like to do, I've learned in the past, is I'm going to put gloves on. When you work with plaster, it gets messy, and anything you can do to try to alleviate the messiness, I'm all for that. So what we're going to do, we'll get this model out of the way. You just got some regular paper towels here, and for no other reason other than this, it just makes a mess. It's that simple. I would probably recommend paper towel or something, not paper towel, a newsprint or something like that, and cover your entire work area with the newsprint. Just makes it easier when you're all done. Pack everything up. This is that wrinkle in the way is going to be a pain. So what I'm doing now is I'm just cutting this up into strips. And actually, yeah, that wrinkle in the paper towel is going to drive me nuts. Okay. I don't know if you can see that. There we go. I might actually have quite a bit here. I'm not 100% sure. We'll see. So the idea is to get all your strips cut up ahead of time, because once you start with the water, that's when things get messy, and you don't want to be trying to cut plaster with wet hands or, you know, wet gloves. It's best to just cut it all up. You know, and the best thing you can do, the package itself is resealable. It's a Ziploc bag. You know, I find it kind of finicky though. I would prefer using an actual Ziploc bag and keep it in there so that it doesn't get wet ahead of time. If it gets wet ahead of time, Obviously it will activate the plaster and you'll be left with nothing that you can use. So as far as cutting up your strips ahead of time, the benefit of that, well, if you don't use it all, you can go ahead and put it back into the Ziploc bag and use it for your next project. If you do use it all, well then there you go, you used it all, you're all set. So I've got quite a few strips here that are long. I'm going to do a couple of strips here, or a couple of pieces here that are smaller, little squares. And you'll see that to good use coming up. Now, traditionally in the past, what has happened is that you would have a bowl of water, off to the side, a bowl of, cool or lukewarm water off to the side, and you would dip your plaster cloth into that bowl of water, and then of course put it on your project. That is very sloppy, and a lot of times I find that the plaster cloth will wrinkle in on itself. As you dip it in and then you try to take it out, now it's all wet and activated, it'll end up sticking to itself, and it will cause, it'll cause you to lose some square yardage on your plaster cloth that way. So I'm going to show you a better way to do it, one that I learned quite a while ago, and it's made a huge difference. Alright, so we basically have some small squares here, we've got some large strips there. Push that off to the side. Got some trees over there. Okay. My method is simple. You just need that, a squirt bottle. So, what you'll do is you'll lay your piece down pretty much about where you want it, give or take. And now, take your squirt bottle and just mist it right over there. Once you've gotten it sufficiently wet, take your fingers, hold down one area of it, and then just kind of stretch the plaster out, or smooth the plaster out, getting all those nooks and crannies of the plaster cloth filled in. You'll want to put a couple of layers of plaster cloth on. So right now we're just doing a basic shaping layer. Just kind of getting it onto the project. And you can always come back with a little bit more water there just to get it. But this way here I have found to have little to no mess at all. As you can see, you're not dipping it into a bucket of water. You're simply laying it on the project, squirting it with this water, and you're done. So let's take another piece. We'll take a smaller piece and we'll go ahead and put that right up there. Overlap the previous one by a little bit. Okay. And this is really easy. This takes, I don't know if you've ever built like volcano projects in school or whatever, and using the plaster cloth, the whole table was a complete disaster area when you were done. And, a lot of that is attributed to doing the old method of dipping it in the bucket of water, and then you're dripping, stuff across the table, and, what a nightmare that could be. So with this technique here, you're not going to have any of that. So let's go ahead and cover this. And you can see you can move pretty quickly, actually. I'll lay that. You can move pretty quickly and get a lot of area covered. Create very little mess doing it this way. Get all your strips cut out ahead of time. Use the squirt bottle for the water technique. Best part about that in the end is there's no bowl of white powdery water when you're done. Because how do you dispose of that? You don't want to put it down the sink. and down the drain, you clog everything up. So your best bet, you know, would, at that point would be to just try to dump all that in the trash, which, you know, now you have a bucket of water in the trash with plaster dust. This way here, you know, no mess, no fuss. So this section over here definitely got covered a couple of times, and that's fine. We're totally okay with that. You want to end up covering pretty much everything with a couple of good coats anyway, so we'll go ahead and take another big one here. I'm going to lay it. Now, you know I'm not going over the edges yet just right now, but I can later. I'm staying away from the edges for right now just because I can do that. I can hit that later with a little bit more of a off camera, so I don't have to worry about trying to film at the same time as trying to make the sides nice and purty. Okay. And hopefully this will kind of get rid of that stigma of using plaster cloth as being a very messy part of the project. It's really not. As far as I'm concerned, you know, using like plaster of Paris or like a Sculptamold or something like this, these types of clay-based techniques is a lot more messier than this. And as long as you use a couple of good coats, you know, you'll be all, or a couple of good layers of the plaster cloth, your project will be just as sturdy and you won't have any problems. Let's get that back a little bit. Okay. I really love doing this type of artwork. I know my channel has a lot of Lego videos on there, but Legos are easy to review because you basically just put them together and tell everybody what you felt about it. But this is what I like. This is where you get to be creative and just create something that's uniquely your own. You know, not necessarily any directions here on how to do this. We're just doing it. We're kind of winging it. And I like that. I like seeing something that I'm making come to life. So I'm going to continue filling the rest of this in, and then we'll go ahead with the next steps. So let's go ahead, and I'll go ahead and finish that off camera now. Okay, so as you can see now, the plaster is all dry, and I've got the house or the shack in position, and I've placed a few trees on here. I'm doing that just so I can get position of where I want to put the trees in the final model, because this segment of it, I'm going to show you how to attach the trees, attach the bases, and have the trees still be portable. So what am I saying? So the trees have this piece on it here. Let me try to zoom in. Okay, so the trees come with this type of a base, and most of them do from Woodland Scenics anyways. It's kind of a standard. It's this type of piece right here. Okay, it looks like a trunk with a hole in it, and then of course the tree itself has a corresponding pin. So when you put those two together, boom, you have a tree, and you can place it on your display. Unfortunately, that doesn't look very realistic, and gluing it in place is kind of difficult. So what we're going to do instead is, now that I kind of see exactly where I want my positions of the trees, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and leave the bases there. We'll take the trees out. And this also allows you to change trees. You know, if you decide that maybe you don't like one of these trees that you have on here and you want to try your hand at making a different one, as long as you leave the bases or these pins on the tree, you can always plug them back into the bases. And you'll see what I'm getting at here in just a minute. We'll get the house out of the way as well. And we'll say we're going to put one more, like maybe right here, so we'll take this one out. Okay. So what we're doing is we're just going to leave the bases. Okay, we'll go ahead and put some gloves on because we're going to start the plaster process again. And if you can see what I'm getting at, we're going to be, what we're going to do is we're going to essentially cover the bases with the plaster cloth, attaching it to the plaster that's already on the display. What that will do is that'll blend in the contours of the tree pieces themselves, or the bottom parts, and create a more realistic connection to the earth. So, make sure we're all kind of in. So what am I talking about here? Well, you're basically going to be putting plaster cloth over the base like this, cutting a hole in it so that you can actually see, so that you can get to the base, and then the plaster will create a bond so that base will be forever locked onto your diorama. So what we'll do is we'll cut a hole. We're going to cut a hole like right in the middle, and nothing too funky. Just going to cut a hole into the plaster. Now I'm going to try to zoom this in so you can see as I'm doing it. Oops. Okay. So that will work. So what we have to do first, though, is we're going to take that off. The important part is getting the plaster that's already on here really wet, and that way the two plasters will adhere to each other. If you don't do it, the plaster won't stick. So what we need to do is we need to just make this really wet. We need to let that plaster soak in that water. Doing so, like I said, will allow the new plaster from the new sheet that we're going to put on to attach to the base. Now, this could have all been done at once, but yeah, I was getting to the point last night when I was doing this that I really didn't want to go any further. I was tired, so I needed to wrap up the video. But so there we go. We got some water on there, and I'm going to put a little bit more. This stage of the game, you can't hurt anything by putting a lot of water on. Okay. So you lay the plaster cloth over. Okay. And since it's really wet, it's pretty much already it already got wet as I put it on. You know, it absorbed the water already. So. Now, worst case scenario is you decide you didn't like the tree in this position. I mean, you could always get more of these bases. Woodland Scenics makes, you know, a bunch of them. So you can always just get another base, and you can leave this base here and just leave it as a tree stump. You know, something that just got, you know, cut down or whatever. I'm just gonna I'm gonna take another one of these and put it over it. So remember, we always want to have at least a couple of layers anytime we do plaster work. That will really bond it in place. Now, the best part about this, and why we do it this way, or why I do it this way, I should say, is because, see, now, when you go ahead and you paint this, alright, let's see if I can get it into the, where are we? There we are. So now when you go ahead and you paint your terrain and you put your grass and your dirt on there and everything else, you still have a nice solid mounting point for your trees, first of all. The second great thing about this is that you could actually change out your trees for the scenery, for the, for the seasons. So in other words, if you got a bunch of spring trees on here and you want to see what your little display would look like with a bunch of fall trees on here, doing it with this technique will allow you to pop those trees out, put in the newer trees, and you instantly have a change of scenery, or a change of scenes. So that's how I recommend doing that one. And it is kind of important to see if the stump is aimed up fairly straight. You want the connection point here to be, you want the connection point of this, the hole, to be fairly vertical, as the best as you can, because obviously when you put your tree in there, if it's not vertical, it's going to look kind of funky. So it is something to consider. Okay. So we'll cut a hole in this one again. And make sure, this is actually plenty of plaster, but that's okay. Plenty is better than not enough. Okay, so that's about where that's going to go. It looks pretty good. Now if your base is not perfectly level, and you think you're going to have a problem with it, you could always put some plaster cloth underneath the base and kind of work with it to make it level. To make this part level, you could put some plaster cloth underneath of it. I think that's pretty good. Just make sure your hole is open so that it can accept your trees. Let's go ahead and put some more. You see how easy this technique is with the squirt bottle, instead of dipping the plaster cloth into a bin of water and then trying to take it out, and that's always a pain. It's so much easier using the spray bottle technique. Okay, fairly good there. We'll take another smaller piece. Just kind of cut a little hole into it. Okay, and just kind of line it up. Get that hole to be visible. If it's not, you could always go in and you can kind of remove it with some. If you got any plaster in there, you could remove it with a X-Acto knife or something. You can sure it up a little bit better that way. Okay. Now, you could also put the tree stumps directly onto the foam, the pink foam, before you even lay down any of the plaster cloth, and that would definitely save material, because you're already adding the plaster cloth to begin with. But for the purposes of demonstration, that's fine doing it this way. And last, we have another one right here. And if you think the stump doesn't fit very well, or it looks kind of awkward, you could always cut these, and you can trim them using either some scissors. There you go. And if you think that would fit a little bit better in your area or in your spot that you've dedicated for it, just go ahead and trim. Where are we? Right there. Okay. So we've got that to fit. It's going to be okay. That off, so we're going to go ahead and do that. I still had a few more pieces of this plaster cloth from left over from last night, which is perfect. I had just enough in this small bag to do this project, which is great. I have a larger bag of this stuff somewhere else, but like I said, I couldn't find it when I straightened up my apartment. I was having some difficulty as to remembering where I put it, but at any rate, so this is just enough to get this project done, which is perfect. So I'm going to cut a hole in there. We know that's going to fit. Get your plaster wet, nice and wet. You can't hurt the plaster that's underneath of it by getting it more wet. It's fine. That's the thing about plaster, is it will absorb. And when it's done absorbing, it just won't absorb anymore, but you won't ruin it. And I remember building model railroads when I was a kid, much younger, and you just put the trees on the grass mat and you called it a day. But you know, you bump the table and all the trees would fall over. And then you think about, well, maybe we'll put some glue there or something and see how that works. And you go ahead and put glue there. So it was a gentle progression. I'm actually going to use this little piece. Doesn't seem like there's much on here, but I'm going to try to put it right around the edge here. It's kind of like a leftover bit. Try to give that tree a little bit more stability by sticking this underneath of it here a little bit. Yeah, and see how wet plaster is. It just blends right in perfectly anyway. So, okay, we'll go ahead and do another piece. Again, we're just going to go ahead and cut a little hole in the center, or really just a slit, just to fit over the opening of the trunk. Come back in with some more water. And obviously the more plaster you put to your diorama, the more rigid you make it anyway. So this will allow it to be transported or handled or whatever without fear of it breaking or coming apart on you. So the more plaster you use, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, let me go ahead and take off my gloves. Zoom the camera back out a little bit. Okay. Away. Okay, so yep, so this is now ready to rock and roll. We've got 3 different areas for trees to go into. You know, once the plaster is dry, you just go ahead and take your tree and you'll be able to plug it right into that stump, and it's going to be great. It'll be so much easier than worrying about how to glue them to the base later on. You can just plop it right there and you can take it right out. So that concludes this portion of the creation of the Uncle Tats Creative Shack model. And stay tuned for the next segment of this mini-series. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.